Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of Great Shouts Marketing and Growth Webinars. I am your host, Ed Davidson. I am a fractional head of marketing. And this series, we're talking about kind of growing pains, how companies move from a startup status into a scale-up kind of position. And we are having kind of warts and all interviews with marketing leaders and company owners. And today it's great to see James Ker-Reid with us today. He's CEO and founder of Startups, Sales for Startups. And he's given us a great insight, both in terms of his position for that company, but all the clients that he's worked with as well. So James, great to have you. It'd be great to just have a little bit of an introduction from you. Who you are, what you're doing for self-startups at the moment.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ed, for having me on. So yeah, I'm the CEO and founder of Sales for Startups. So we are a sales consultancy that's focused on B2B tech companies. And typically we're focusing on founder-led B2B tech companies. So they've got some initial traction. They're running most of the operations themselves, but how do they scale that beyond themselves? How do they build in a team to become kind of the startup to scale up transition, or from a founder-led to a team-led approach? So I've been doing that now for 7 years. Started myself and now have a team. And we've worked with 45 B2B tech companies. And they're typically anywhere between sort of 500,000 revenue and about 3 million when we start working with them. So yeah, very much in that small team of 10 to 40 people typically when we start working with them.
Makes sense. Great. Thanks for that. So I suppose the first kind of classic kickoff question here is, how do you define when a startup kind of moves into more of a kind of scale up status from your kind of position?
Yeah, I think the definition of this varies from person to person. And I think it's not one single thing or one single metric that defines whether a startup to scale up. People will say about product market fit, but how do you define product market fit? Is that like a revenue number? Is that market share number? Is that, density in a certain region? What does that mean? So I think that, there's a couple of things for me. I think for me, it's a lot about the development of the commercial model, both obviously externally facing as well as internally facing. So you would normally say that you would have a blend of marketing, sales, and customer success, team members that are scaling up the company into the market. And that typically, to people that love a straight answer, I would say that somewhere between sort of 3 to 5 million is typically that sort of product market fit level from what I see. There's lots of iterations and things to be done. But normally at that level, they would have sort of a Series A, probably most likely Series B funding, or they would be at such a revenue if they were, self-funded, that they'd really start to scale quite aggressively at that point.
Makes sense. And I mean, you kind of talked about those kind of KPIs there. How do you tend to kind of position the KPIs in the businesses that you work with? And do those KPIs kind of change over time? Kind of examples that I always kind of find is that, say, from a marketing side, you're looking at very much kind of direct response cost per acquisition. As you start to scale up, there's a more kind of presence of the brand there, for example, and the brand can benefit in terms of reducing the overall cost per acquisition, but also kind of gives that that brand position might evolve over time as well. So how that kind of changes things. So we can understand your view on that.
Yeah, certainly. Like, I think the metrics do change as you progress. I think there are always some sort of summary metrics that often stay there. Like you talked about cost of acquisition. I don't think many tech companies would say that's a bad metric to measure whether you're a startup or, Monzo and extreme scale up mode. So I think they would still be interested in that metric. The same on the sales side, sales cycle would still be a very important metric, whatever stage really you're at. Average deal value would be another one. Conversion by a certain stage obviously would be very important. Conversion rate by channel is also very interesting from a sales and marketing angle, and also helps blend the teams quite nicely together. So yeah, I think the metrics do change. And also when you go into scale up mode and potentially like RevOps and other elements are added to the company, You're also looking at things like sales load costs, time to first deal, return on assets from a commercial point. So how much do you spend, in staffing, for example, and what's that return on the top line of the company? So those metrics do change as you scale up, but I think that, those metrics are also owned by different departments as you scale. So it's not necessarily right to say, oh, these are the metrics for this stage, because you have different team members, different structures. Um, you might have RevOps team, you might have a sort of financial planning analysis team or FPA team that own certain metrics around like the commercial viability of the business. So yeah, it does change, I think, for sure.
Is there a kind of sequence to those kind of different, took it about kind of RevOps there, or different departments? Is there each kind of size and scale that you get to, there's a clear definition of bringing things in for efficiencies, or where you're kind of seeing that growth? How have you kind of seen those different departments, or kind of how team members grow within each company?
Yeah, I think there is a certain type of, there's some like common trends. It's not like a one size fits all, but there are some commonalities. So you would have like, for example, a lot of people talk about sales velocity, for example, which is also a metric that, is integrated into the marketing practices as well. Um, but I think sales velocity is like the equation form that it was almost created, whatever it was, 12, 15 years ago. And has massively pushed it forward. I think that the early stage sales velocity is a nice sort of metric to look at, but I'm not sure it's on the dashboard. Whereas sales velocity at the larger scale is very important, because you're really also looking at sales velocity within team members. So I remember when I was one of 10 reps, I looked at the sales velocity equation of the different team members, and that was very insightful to see. Like basically, because you had everything on Salesforce, you could basically work out the sales velocity per rep. And that was very interesting to see, who was doing what, and also from a coaching point of view, you learn a lot from your peers. So seeing who was great at sort of, the close rate, who was great at sort of pipeline generation, time to sell, you could see who was really good on certain metrics, and sort of start to understand and unpick, what were the winning practices, within those particular reps. That was quite a useful thing to do in your sort of first month of onboarding as a like enterprise AE. You were just learning from your peers, and you didn't really have all the market understanding at that point in time. But seeing those metrics, whereas I think at an earlier stage you wouldn't have that many teammates to look at it. To be honest, the quality of data might be also not up to par, if we're honest with ourselves as well. So, some of the sort of long-standing metrics would work quite well, like average deal value, close rate, these kind of really important metrics that are kind of mainstays. They would always be sort of there at the early stage, I think.
And at the early stage, obviously, you're trying to bring in customers. There's that kind of element of pipeline. Does, especially kind of from a sales perspective, when does kind of churn play a part in terms of you're maybe bringing in pipeline, you be converting at a reasonably high level, but especially from a SaaS perspective, then if there's kind of annual level of churn, or there's particular drop off of particular cohorts when you're bringing in different people, when do you think that becomes really important?
That becomes very important. Obviously, you can see, often sometimes we'll go into a company that's had like a challenging year or a challenging quarter. And that's something often we spot. We've even done like analyses by person on churn rate per customer as well. So you can look at individual reps and seeing what their churn rate is. And you can plot that over timeline as well. So you can see your average churn rate per rep, which is very interesting. I would think that, again, if you've got sort of team more than about 4 to 5 people, that becomes quite relevant. And that especially becomes relevant when you have different regions that you sell in, because you can see what's the performance of the region. So yeah, I would say that like not just churn rate, because I think that is important early on. But I think for sales to talk about sales people and the sales team, again, I'm always one for a straight answer. Sometimes people say it's a bit more complex than this, but I would say about 1 million revenue or more, you kind of really need to be looking from an individual level, not as a company level, at the churn rate for like the reps as well. Because what you don't want to do is this is where you're in that sort of product market fit phase where you're looking at what types of customers stay with us. And then you also got to relay that with also the customer experience or the buying experience as well. So there is a part to play, obviously, for the salespeople in that end outcome. So that's very interesting to look when you've got like a small team and upwards. We've seen like, people that are top performers with the highest churn rate. And we've actually like, unfortunately, exited the top performers of the company, so the highest churn rate. And so say there were 6 reps in a team, we've got rid of the top 2 reps in that instance because their churn rate was absolutely massive. And actually, if you look at it on economic value, rep 3 and 4 in the sort of league table were way more profitable and had much longer kind of client retention or customer retention than the top 2 reps. So it's kind of like using the coarse phrase of like churn and burn. It really was kind of a little bit like that in the top 2 reps. And so they were hitting target and they were hitting bonuses and doing, they were thinking that they were, top of the league table in every sense of the word. And then it was like, but actually you're costing us money. And then when you compare that economic value to load cost, as in how much does a salesperson cost you per year, including software expenses, taxes, etc., you realize there's a massive disparity there, even more so. So you're like, wow, like almost sort of, it's like a return on assets equation, but just very sort of department led. So you're saying this person is costing us a lot more and the customers are staying around for a very short time, which is obviously costing us money. And then you look into add into the cost of acquisition into that, and you're like, this just does not make economic sense to keep this person.
And I suppose is that kind of down to kind of over promising in terms of what the product was going to deliver, or is it kind of down to just not the right fit when the conversations with the customers coming in? So yeah, I suppose it's that, and then that difference between say product-led growth and sales-led growth. If there's more of a sales touch point, is it down to that salesperson to sell the dream, but then maybe it's not that right fit, rather than somebody actually more engaging with the product beforehand?
Yeah, I think, I always think I don't like the sort of dichotomy between product led and sales led growth. I think companies, at least the B2B tech, which is my area of expertise, I think you can do both. And I think you need to do both. Even when you're an enterprise company, I think there are elements of product led growth that you could do. I think whether that's like the trial or the pilot, even if it's short in time, as well as obviously once they're actually in the product to customers, that there's a lot of product led growth. And even people could say like account management could be defined as product led growth in some ways because they're using the product as spotting opportunities, but often sometimes it needs a human to sort of navigate the buying centers of these different enterprises. But yeah, I think coming back to your earlier question, I think a lot of the time it is around the target market definition, and what is the offer, what is the outcomes, that particular customer wants to achieve. And I think that is really overlooked. I think, to be honest, not to be disparaging, but I think the marketing trade really has like overly pushed the target market, sort of marketing around positioning. And like everyone talks about positioning so much, it's almost been overdone that it's kind of been undervalued as an exercise. Because when I first started, there were thousands of people saying that we could do your value prop in target market. And I was like, that is obviously really valuable, and I agree with them. But because of the sheer volume of people who are professing the same message,
Right.
I think the kind of quality dilution from the intent has been wasted over sometimes. So almost it's like people have this sort of buyer's reluctance, to actually focus on, delving into the target market, really interrogating it, because they've done some sort of workshop with a CMO, fractional CMO before, they've had a marketing consultancy in doing it as well. And some of those things have value, but also on the other side, sometimes they're not done properly. The founder says, oh, we've done that already. We don't need to do that. And then when you look at the data, you're like, yeah, you probably do need to do that. So, yeah, I think the data is, pretty important, and can tell you a lot more than people think about it. So, yeah, I don't think it does. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where have you seen like the best examples with the companies that you've worked with, where they've just nailed both the value prop, but also the need in the market? So is this that perfect marrying up of a kind of a growing market that's hungry, has those pain points, and then a value proposition that matches it? Where have you seen the kind of best
Yeah.
examples of that?
Yeah, I think like we work with this company called Fon. It's a construction tech company based in Norway. I think they did an exceptional job around that as well. I think they initially, even when they contacted us, they came to us and said, we need a sales playbook because we need to increase sales conversion. And, our reps aren't selling enough, they're not converting enough, they're not converting quick enough, they're missing target. They had all these problems, right? They also had a churn problem as well that they were kind of semi-aware of as well. Have looked into it and realized that we really needed to interrogate the target market really carefully and actually, you know, go back to the drawing board for a short amount of time and get clarity on that. So doing the customer interviews, looking at the product usage as well, marrying that up with the intent on the sort of marketing messaging point of view, and seeing actually how people are using the product and why they think people buy the product and why they actually buy the product as well. And that's really interesting to think about when you're doing those interviews, is like picking a variety of different customers as well. So the people that are newly onto the product, but also people who have been using it for a year or 2 years as well. Because it's interesting to see how use cases develop, as obviously your product probably will improve during that time. But it's just very interesting how that positioning internally changes over time, the
Mm.
rhetoric, even within those customers. So if you speak to, I was speaking to M&S earlier as well, and the use of our clients' products, doing some kind of customer interviews for them, and their usage and the way that they talk about the product to their seniors and exec board is very different from what they said like a year ago.
Mm.
So it's just quite interesting to look and obviously to have a good varied subset to kind of make those conclusions, rather than just say, yeah, we did some customer interviews and this is what we said, because it depends on what type of customers, how long they've used the product for as well. I would take those into account.
I think it's also in terms of the moving that startup to scale up, it's the, moving from the early adopters that potentially have like that pain to a kind of wider in the Venn diagram, the wider kind of group of people that you
Yeah.
take after. And yeah, how do you have a message that speaks to both those groups? So yeah, interesting. So I said a lot of what we talk about here is around kind of marketing. You're obviously dealing with marketing departments, also with sales departments. How have you seen the best situations where sales and marketing play well together? And then have you seen any kind of car crashes as well, warts and all?
Yeah, I've seen quite a lot of both actually, in terms of the good, bad, and ugly. Um, so yeah, I think on the ugly side, I think it's the classic thing of separation and silo thinking. I think that also, marketing is changing, as you know, a lot. And the thing I've started to think about a lot and also tell our customers about is this idea of channels is pretty actually quite redundant thinking now in today's marketplace, because channels are not in isolation.
Mm.
So, a customer journey or prospect journey is actually, a whole plethora, a multitude of experiences that create, obviously, at the right time, a reach out or a request or a message or a demo booking, etc. And yeah, I think that for people to say, oh, we advertise on this channel, it's got to be connected to other channels. It's got to be connected to other forms of content and messages as well. So I like to talk about sort of prospect journeys. And that's often, across multiple channels. If you look at the way in which you buy or experience products, especially high value products, you don't normally have one engagement. You see one post on LinkedIn or one email, and then like you purchase there and then for something that's like 10, 20,000. Would you buy a car, for example, just from seeing an advert in TV? No. But that, advert along, speak to other friends, look at your auto trader, looking online, doing your research, going in a friend's car that is that car that you've seen.
Mm.
All of these experiences add up to you making that big purchase. So I think it's really important as to B2B. And I'm not sure the thinking has really moved on in terms of implementation of that understanding in the marketplace. So a lot of people talking about, whole customer life cycle marketing. They're talking about omni-channel experience has been here for quite a while, and marketing throughout the customer journey. But these things are like the theory often comes, front and center. It seems for quite a few years before people actually implement it.
Mm.
And I find that also is one of the problems with the sales and marketing department is that their interest in some ways, people say they're all aligned, but on a human level, on an individual level, they're not quite aligned. And that's quite a good thing in some ways as well, because those two departments need to do different activities to create the results.
Mhm.
So it's good that their incentives and their mindsets are slightly different. Obviously, you've got to create collaboration and create synergy between those departments. But the human level too, it's like the age-old thing to be sort of rejected 99 times in a row and get one. Like that's not necessarily the kind of the mindset necessarily you want for the marketer. So it's like, and to be honest, you're not asking to have that sort of persistence and that level of going sort of above and beyond in order to realize the sale. It's like one of my bosses always said, in sales 90% of what you do you won't get paid for. So that's quite a bitter pill to swallow when you actually think about what you do in work. It's kind of the way it is. But yeah, I think some of the good is regular feedback cycles. I think yeah, some smart data as well to understand what's happening, what's not happening, and also just creating a sort of environment of safety as well is quite important. I think a lot of people are wanting sometimes the bad or the ugly is like where people point fingers and they say, so where's my leads? And the other people say, oh, I created all these leads for you and you didn't sell them. And, you go kind of back and forth in this finger pointing exercise. And that's why I love working with early stage startups because we kind of both know we're all working out at the same time.
Mm.
So it's a level playing field in that sense because the salespeople kind of working out like the offer and the pitch and the positioning and obviously some of the key questions and objections that come up. The marketing are working out obviously the messaging, the channel selection, the experience, the data side of it. They're looking at where spend is efficient, how long things take, how many touch points things take, what content, what messages, what forms work. So that's why I love what we do is that you kind of both got that acceptance. You're working out together. So you always connect on that similar point. Whereas I think sometimes in the larger departments, there's roles become more specialized and therefore also become way more under scrutiny as also other interests enter into the fray, right? Yeah, especially the difference often between a PE and a VC firm is also quite different as well. So there are subtle things that obviously do happen in terms of changing that company sort of philosophy or feel that has, that's embedded within the culture.
Yeah, I think you're kind of, as you're saying, in terms of that life cycle kind of management, I think there's often a view that it has to be a funnel, and there's a very clear funnel that a user is going to take, and it's going to be perfect for the customer. And there's often, key parts that happen as they go across. I've heard kind of instances that a deal is closed because somebody's heard a piece of PR. And you kind of think that's going to be at the top in terms of awareness, but that's actually got them over the line. So yeah, I think that's exactly right. Um, and how do you think, I suppose, the difference between, say, acquisition, but then account development, does that kind of sit within kind of your remit, kind of, marketing and sales, or is that kind of more of a customer success thing? And how do you have that? Is there a separation, or is that kind of part of what you do with companies?
Yeah, it is part of what we do with companies. I think, it's important to know the context of our companies is that that account management function is often early on. So it's owned by customer success normally at that point. And then customer success is normally sort of specializing and like fragmenting in a simple way to obviously have more specialized roles over time. But in the very super early days, especially the founder led to team led, that is often led by sales, but it's supported by marketing for sure. Is that the visibility and the positioning of those engagements or those moments with customers is very important. Like I think that's very much neglected. I think account growth is one of the most underrated skills in B2B technology. I think very few people actually know how to do it. I think also even marketers are still learning and upskilling a lot. They talk about account-based marketing. That is also slightly different from like growing accounts in some ways. There are subtleties that are obviously connected, but I don't think you can sort of use one term to describe what that looks like. So yeah, I think the best practices are um, when you combine the two. I think early on it is typically owned by sales and then customer success a little bit later. Again, like often the customer success people you bring on early on, the account growth skills aren't often quite there. So you get a bit of a sort of crossover between sales and CS. And then when the upskilling of the CS comes on board, then you would see more of a handover or quicker handover. So you might see like structures where sales might own the account and its growth for say the first 12 months of this journey with the product and with the software, but obviously when the skill development improves on the CS and account management function, that might be after 30 days instead of 12 months. So yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I think it's very underrated, and I've seen that especially in our audience of the sort of 1 to 3 million or 500k to 3 million sort of market, is that the emphasis a couple of years ago was on new logo acquisition, and that was almost the route to funding. And I think that landscape has changed, especially post COVID, into more of net revenue retention, obviously ultimately retention of customers, and it's also been about how you've grown those customers, not just in terms of revenue, but also in terms of usage as well, which is quite important. And those things I don't think have really sort of kicked on in terms of like the actual implementation of the theory yet. Investors are interested in it, founders know it's important, but I'm not sure the team and the actual working practices have kind of closed that gap on the theory yet. So it'd be interesting to see whether people are able, from like a skills and practice point of view, close that gap in coming years, because I think it is very important. Like we've all seen a lot of decks of companies fundraising, and you actually see the similar names or similar companies come up on these decks, and then you ask them, oh, sort of how many users do you have within that company, and how many potential users could you have within that company? And you realize typically it's between 1% and 5% of the total, addressable user base. And you think, wow, we're spending all of this money, on going after net new customers and people that don't know us. But we can't even sell to the people who already know us and have already bought from us and are paying us yearly or monthly at the moment. You're like, wow, that's a really poor investment of our time and our resources. And it's especially for a lot of companies growing that user base, and obviously that investment that they have within your product is a really good story to tell as well at the next investment round, rather than we signed sort of 20 more customers, and we've only got 14 left, and we're at this. Yes, we have gone up revenue, but I think there's room for a bit of both and a bit more towards account growth. I'm seeing that more and more, is that you spend so much time winning these enterprise accounts, and then once you've got them, you kind of neglect them. That's what often a lot of people do, I think.
Yeah, and look, if you can improve the lifetime value, right, or kind of the average order value that they're doing, every given quarter or year, then obviously that has a massive impact to the cost of acquiring those customers, because you can have a far more pour into the pot if you're getting more out of them. I think as well, it'd be interesting to hear kind of how that works with referrals as well, because obviously you're expanding the account, it leads to operations to referrals to people that are similar but non-compete. And again, I think that greases the wheels, as it were, to having those conversations to bring on new customers as well.
Yeah, I'm very interested in referrals, and it's also one of our massive growth levers that we implement into B2B tech companies as well. It's very overlooked. Like, I've had access to a lot of data over the last 7 years. I've been into, I think, even of the 45, probably about 30 unique zero accounts of tech companies, and just looking at the budgets. If you look at advertising and marketing costs, and really breaking that down by channel, that's interesting. And if you count like referrals as a channel, I'd be really interested to hear from the viewers and other people how much they spend on referral marketing. Because having looked at a lot of these companies, referral marketing is very, very low in terms of spend. Even in my own company, I had a look at it last year because I did the same as I professed in my own company. And I was like, geez, we are spending next to nothing in referrals. What are we doing? We made you just referrals, I think we made about 500,000 just from referrals last year. I was like, and we're spending not even 10% of that on referral marketing. I was thinking that's just crazy. It's very interesting to look at that. I think referrals is also connected. That's why marketing sales need to be very close together, because it's connected to the customer journey as well. Things like not only just marketing to them, but also understanding them at a deeper level after the purchase. So holding VIP customer dinners and things like that, round tables, really getting deep as to what's going on in the industry, what's going on in their environments as well. And the great thing is, often you'll find, your champion or your, super users attend those events, and they're quite candid with you with the information. It's not all sort of overly hidden or overly corporatized in terms of the actual pain points they're experiencing day to day within their companies. And obviously then with a group of 10, 12 people, you can sort of make some sort of judgment as to what's really going on in the sector as well. So I think, I would really encourage people to look at what they're spending per channel, and also add in referral to that. And cost of acquisition, I haven't seen many people's metrics that say cost of acquisition, and they also said cost of the existing business growth or customer expansion. I haven't really heard that being talked about at all. Is how much do you spend on existing customer marketing, and what's the return on that marketing in order to increase revenue? And so, I think, often a lot of the marketing metrics are focused at the top of the funnel, especially around spend is focused on the top of the funnel. And really the marketing budget I haven't seen broken down, to a good level, because you look at it and you think, wow, if we took our top 10 customers and, only five of them attend, say, and we added another five prospects into that round table and kept it to a maximum of 10 people, what would that look like in terms of cross-pollination between those different customers and the potential of winning one of those five, within the next 6 months as a result of that round table? It's not going to be the only touch point, don't get me wrong, but it's one of those touch points that kind of greases the wheels, a bit like your PR example. You think it's brand awareness at the top, but it's actually like, oh yeah, they've really kind of moved on their product now. Now they're in a position where they're a viable option for us.
Mm.
So yeah, that's very interesting. Like referral, it is complex. A lot of these companies as well, when I ask about what's their referral marketing strategy, it's crickets. So, and they're like, oh yeah, occasionally sort of take them out for a meal or something like that. They'll say something very anecdotal.
Mm.
You say, okay, so how many people have you taken out for a meal in the last sort of 3 months? None. Okay, well, what about the last 6 months? Yeah, we've done two. Okay. And how many people did you invite to those dinners, or how many people did you reach out for those dinners as well? Oh no, dinners is not the only way. I'm not saying that's the only way to do referral marketing, but it's just a live example.
Yeah, yeah. And how you systemize it as well, to showing the metrics, but also it's not just individual occasional meetings. It's how you're, and as you're saying, how you're identifying those super users, building those relationships, and how you can cross-thread or cross-pollinate with other people similar within their network to then bring people in as well. Look, we're
Yeah.
definitely at time here. And
Okay.
yeah, thank you so much, James. There's so much seasoned content in there. Look, at the end of each of these sessions, I'm kind of asking, what, from your view, what's the best piece of advice you could recommend kind of founders of a company who are going through this process of growing pains from a startup to scale up? Is there kind of one thing that stands out for you?
I'd say focus on sales conversion before you put your money into customer acquisition.
Makes sense. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Look, appreciate it. And thanks everyone. See you in the next session.